would just like to put a disclaimer in here, everyone. This is going to be the format for the opinion videos. They're going to be more relaxed. I'm going to have some pauses where I think. I'm going to have not a script like normal where I have my thoughts all thought out. It's mostly just me jotting down bullet points of what to talk about. There's going to be random pauses. There's going to be different sounds going on around my apartment, like my dog. There's going to be different sounds, like I might lean back in my chair or something, and that sometimes causes sound. I might take a drink because they're probably going to be longer format videos. Um, yeah, I just wanted to interject this little bubble in here first. I'm actually recording this after I recorded the audio, and I just thought I'd interject this so you might understand why some of my videos may be different quality to others. I try and do my information videos that are based on research and things like that entirely in a more professional manner, whereas this is going to go up as an opinion video. And to that effect, opinion videos are exactly that. They're my opinions. I feel like I should be more relaxed and able to speak freely and with thought rather than just spouting off things on a sheet of paper. That's one example. I just coughed. Not gonna edit that out. If you don't like it, fuck you. Hello, and welcome to The Offensive Truth. Today we are going to be talking about eugenics. As you can see on screen, eugenics is defined as the practice or advocacy of controlled selective breeding of human populations, as by sterilization, to improve the population's genetic composition. So, eugenics is effectively the human version of how we domesticated animals. As in, we breed we bred animals with certain traits that we liked so that they could more effectively express those traits and give us more of what we wanted. Such as with how we domesticated dogs from wolves. Cows have been domesticated in a similar way to become more docile, as well as with, for example, Holstein cows to produce more milk. We have proved that this kind of forced evolution can happen and can work, and eugenics is really just bringing that to the human realm as a way to advance humanity itself. So, let's begin. So first, I want to talk a little bit about examples and the history of eugenics. The idea of eugenics started around 1883, and it came from Sir Francis Galton, who was a cousin of Charles Darwin. And his main idea was to advance humanity by breeding humans that had desired traits. And people were basically classified into desirable or unfit, and they should be allowed to breed from there so that humanity would advance to become better, but we'll talk about that later. Some examples throughout history. Actually, American feminism, believe it or not, had a play in eugenics. Only some of them. Some of them advocated for eugenics. I will put that disclaimer there. Margaret Sanger, the founder of Planned Parenthood, actually. She was the leader of the American birth control movement. She saw birth control as a means to prevent unwanted children from being born into disadvantaged lives. And she also discouraged reproduction for people who may pass along mental diseases or serious birth defects. And that in itself is a very eugenicist way to look at things. We will get some more on her later, I believe, but that was an interesting tidbit to me to figure out that American feminism back in the day contributed to eugenics. Good times. There were many other American foundations and things included in eugenics. The links in the description will take you to places that you can see the eugenics history in America. We had some eugenics programs, most of which involve forced sterilization of people, mostly asylum patients and things like that. But anyways, speaking of American eugenics, Nazi eugenics. This is probably the thing people know the most about. The Nazis and their crusade for the Aryan race, or, a generally superior human. The Nazi eugenics, the Nazis, like, forced sterilization programs and things, were actually inspired by programs that were in the US. Because we were doing this before they were, to a much lesser scale. But yes, early Nazi eugenics is actually inspired by US programs, and even more interesting, specifically the eugenics programs that were in California. There was a researcher, I can't think of his name at the moment. He actually went over to Germany to discuss their eugenics programs and take a look at the Nazis' eugenics programs. And by 1934, there was something around, I believe, 5,000 people per month facing forced sterilization in Germany already. By the end of the Third Reich, there were over 400,000 people forced sterilized. One thing Nazi Germany did is, unlike Americans, which had many different institutions, a diversity of ideas on how to actually implement eugenics, some people thought, we'll just stop at discouraging reproduction. Some said we'll stop at forced sterilization. Some even went as far as saying, hey, maybe these people should just be exterminated. However, Americans, as always, had a diversity of ideas on how something should happen. The Germans, however, were organized very structurally, and all the eugenicists in Germany belonged to one organization called the German Society for Racial Hygiene. That should give you a pretty good implication on what they were all about. So, in 1935 in Nazi Germany, the Nuremberg Laws were implemented. Part of these laws were to preserve racial purity of Nazi Germany, and the specific part of the law I'm speaking of required both partners before they got married to be subjected to hereditary disease testing, because they didn't want people to be born mentally retarded or physically retarded in a society where they were trying to create perfect human beings. Interesting as well, the SS, members of the SS in particular, were encouraged, quote unquote, to look strenuously into their potential fiance or potential partner's history before proposing to them, but to do it in such a way that it was not going to be taken as an offense by their potential partner. Some proponents of eugenics would be, obviously, racial purists. We can see with the Nazis, that's what they're about. They're about racial purity. If you were to talk to some people, no matter what side they're on, if it's white supremacists, black supremacists, there's just certain people who see, in this case it would be races mixing, as wrong, but that is a sort of eugenics in itself, in keeping a race pure. There are some scientists who are proponents of it still today, like Richard Dawkins, but take that with a disclaimer. I'm not saying he is pro-eugenics and as in he wants to establish a eugenics program. It's mostly people who are against the idea of not even debating the ethics on eugenics. For this, I will call Planned Parenthood a proponent of eugenics, because they perform quite a number of services, and one of which is abortions. So, in 2016, this is all data from their site. It's linked in the description as always. You can find it yourself. They performed 321,384 abortions alone, and that was only 30% of the abortion market, and that's only in the US. So if you consider that that's only about 30%, we could say there were really, realistically, if that's 30%, there's about 321,000. There were just under a million abortions, probably just about in the US in 2016. I didn't actually look up those numbers, I looked up specifically Planned Parenthood. The reason I say this is a eugenics program is because they are, in fact, ending unwanted pregnancy like the founder always wanted. Maybe not in the exact way she wanted, because they're not doing it specifically for the reason of advancing the desirable traits of humanity. However, I think they deserve their own little say, because they're effectively limiting the gene pool. They're influencing genetics, whether they think about it or not. So, the modern day opposition to eugenics is really most people. Most people view eugenics as having a negative connotation. If you ever talk to someone who's even ever heard the phrase eugenics before, they almost immediately think of the Nazis, which is kind of fair. They killed a lot of people with the eugenics programs, I guess you would call. They killed a lot of people with the Final Solution, which was kind of a really big eugenics program. Because I mean, all they were doing was getting rid of the undesirables in society, and the Nazis saw the undesirables as, homosexuals, the disabled, Jews. Jews, I don't think they really saw as much as they saw them as unfit for their society. They had a really negative view on them. Romanians, or not Romanians, gypsies particularly. Not all Romanians are gypsies, but many gypsies are Romanian. Square and rectangle argument. And another big opposition to eugenics today is modern ethics. Ethics today says that, especially the forced stuff, forced sterilization and all that, modern ethics will tell you, yeah, that's wrong. So, it's pretty undisputed that ethics have come directly in opposition to eugenics, as it has been practiced in the past. So, a few things to discuss that may be overlooked in the name of all of this. A lot of people claim that Planned Parenthood is a eugenics organization specifically targeting minorities. Looking at the Planned Parenthood data myself, there's only a minor overrepresentation of minorities. Looking into their data, Hispanics counted for 17%, whites counted for somewhere around 50... Hold on a second. It's like 52%, something like that. Their pie chart was really strange. It didn't actually count Hispanics as their own group. They had like mixed races, Asians, other, whites, and blacks, which I think is really dumb, because they had a little notation down at the bottom for Hispanics were this much, but they were divided into these groups, and they put them in every group but black, so it made every group look bigger and black look smaller. And even when black was that smaller chunk, it was still like 19% or something like that. To put into perspective, I think blacks are something like 12 to 13% of the population. Hispanics are like 15%, I think. I'm not sure. Asians were like 2.4% on there, so I think they're actually underrepresented. Whites are almost on par. They're a little bit low. Mixed races and others, I have no idea what the hell the demographics for that are in the US. But there's only a minor overrepresentation of certain minorities. For the abortion stats anyways. As far as if you were to discuss how many babies they actually, because they prevent a lot too, technically, mostly by giving out different contraceptives. And I think they had something like 5 or 7 million, one of those two numbers, of just contraceptive services provided in 2016. Again, links in the description, take a look at it for yourself. Another point would be, people always think back on eugenics as having always had a bad name. It hasn't. Eugenics, as we discussed before, was termed in 1983. Sorry, scratch that, 1883. And it was actually looked upon favorably, I guess you would call it. It didn't have a bad name. It had actually quite a large following in the scientific community. Well, quite a large. It had a scientific following, and it had a following in the scientific community. Sorry, and it actually wasn't viewed badly until after we had found out about the whole Nazi Lebensraum thing. Especially, that was especially bad because there were so many for us. I mean, there's a lot of Americans involved in that, like the Society for Racial Hygiene in Germany got money from like the Rockefeller Institute and stuff like that. So it was uh it was definitely a kind of a black mark on the name of eugenics for the past, what, it's been like 80 years. It's definitely been a black mark ever since World War II on the name of eugenics. So it has not always been bad though. That's the point of that. The when I said the opposition comes from modern ethics, one of the discussions for that has to be the fact that religious people are pretty much overwhelmingly against eugenics. If I had to say anything, it's mostly on the grounds of morality, because we shouldn't force people to do anything. We're already designed in God's image, all that good stuff. I don't know exactly what a real argument would be against eugenics in their name if we were just trying to improve humans to be better, but most people would agree that morality in general dictates that you can't just be like, hey, that person is mentally retarded, so we're going to sterilize them, and we're probably going to test their whole family to see if they should have any more kids. That would be a more stringent eugenics program. Anyways, so what we're going to look at last is some benefits that could come from a eugenics program. The first would be the advancement of humanity. And as that I mean, or in that I mean, rather, depending on how you were to do your eugenics program, you could boost certain potential aspects of humans. If you were to, for example, only let people above an IQ of 95 have kids from now on, that was the law tomorrow, the average IQ of humanity would rise, and then it would plateau out again at a higher rate, at a higher bell curve after a certain period. Some people are probably saying, well, the average white person already has an IQ of 100. Why would that make the IQ go up? It's exactly why. White people and Asians are the only people with a bell curve that has a resting middle ground IQ above 95. So if the rest of humanity was made to have to be at least 95 to breed, imagine that was the low end of the spectrum. Right, so now your bell curve has to shift even for people who are averaging at 100 because you have less people on the negative end. So even if people had 100 and they had and their partner had 100 but something happened and genetically the child came out and was at 94, that child can no longer breed. It makes whatever abnormality happened to them less likely to be passed, well, impossible to pass on if you were doing forced sterilization, and then that person wouldn't be able to breed. They're taken, after some years, they're taken out of the pool entirely, and the average shifts ever so little to the right. You would see a new higher average IQ, and you could argue that you could just keep doing that for every few generations, like every 50 or 60 years, just raise the limit a little bit. And when I say a little bit, I mean from the point if you just establish 95 tomorrow, I would say if you raised it like 1 point every 20 years or something like that, that'd be a reasonable, I guess, rate. I mean, it's a pretty fucked up system of testing people, but that would advance humanity. At least it should. I mean, then I guess there'd be an argument to be made on how fast our IQ could actually advance so that people could still have kids. We don't know because we haven't tried this. We do know that IQ historically was going up for humanity up until we reached around the end of the industrial revolution, when it became really easy for all classes of people to survive. Because once that happened, especially poor people started having many more children, and the average IQ of who are people who are poor are normally less intelligent, and if they have more kids, then on average their kids will be less intelligent. Bing, bada boom, you have a slow decline of average IQ. The extremes may remain the same, however, the average goes down because there are more people that have a lower IQ, so the average is pulled. On this case, would be on a number line, so it'd be to the left. Anyways, second point, second benefit, you could use it to rid humanity of certain hereditary disabilities and diseases. So, to this effect, you would, of course, slowly but surely get rid of many forms of mental retardation, as well as many forms of physical retardation. Depends on how that goes. Like, yeah, there's a lot of things to be said there. As far as how much of things are genetically passed versus random mutations, there's something to be said about a link to both. However, a perfectly healthy line of family members that's, never had a genetic problem in any line of the family for the past 100 years, two people could all of a sudden have a child with autism, and there would be no real reason for it. I mean, you're assuming the pregnancy was normal, there was no, substances involved that would affect the pregnancy. It can just happen. It could be a random genetic mutation that happens, but that would be why genetic testing would be required, and at that point, whatever level of eugenics program you have would dictate what happened to the baby once it was born and, diagnosed with autism. But you would slowly but surely, you would see those numbers greatly decline under eugenics program. The number of children born with disabilities would drop, which would essentially rid humanity of them. And when I say rid humanity, obviously that's viewing the disabilities in a negative light, because most people don't take a disability as a positive. So, my last benefit that I jotted down, an increase in the general health and the capabilities of people. So, the reason I say increase in general health is you don't have, again, those genetic problems that it could be as simple as something genetically where you have a weaker immune system. That could be weeded out by eugenics programs. Again, depends on how stringent your qualifications are for a eugenics program. My assumption is if you were going to start a eugenics program, it would start pretty relaxed. When I say pretty relaxed, I mean like, your base starting would be people with disabilities can't have children, and then it would go on to people with a long history of disabilities in their family can't have children, and then you would just advance and advance and advance until you got to the point where every person born is, I don't want to say damn near perfect human, because I don't mean like they don't think they look like a perfect human, but genetically they would be very strong. They would, and I don't mean physically strong with that either. Speaking of physically strong, the capabilities of people. If you were to use eugenics, let's say that you make a eugenics program that is specifically to breed athletes for your country for the Olympics, you could make a eugenics program out of just selecting Olympic athletes to breed, or let's say not Olympic athletes, because there's really not that many of them, so you would horribly narrow the gene pool. Let's say you take national athletes, anyone who plays a national sport, so all baseball players, all football players, all soccer players, hell, I'll even give tennis players a shout. People that participated in Olympic sports, people that participate in, I want to say like decathlons and things like that. People who perform well and participate in those kinds of things. like record setter type people, people who just push, 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 and see good results with their pushing. You could make that a eugenics program to breed a ridiculously good Olympics team. In that same mindset, you could make a eugenics program out of scientists. I don't know how well that would work, but I guess if you were forcing them to breed, now you can make a eugenics program out of scientists, and could argue it with how the scientists would raise the children and with how the genetics works, they would most likely be smart children raised by scientists who would very likely seek a career in science. Alright, so the dangers of eugenics. Probably the most well known danger is politically motivated purification. So, I don't think this is actually why people, I guess I'd say, voted for the Nazi Party, because it was democratic when they came to power. So, people voted for the Nazi Party because Hitler planned to fix everything, all that good stuff. And then his ideology ended up being politically motivated purification. To that effect, he obviously chose the people who wanted to kill carefully. Yeah, that's one of the most dangerous things ever, is a totalitarian state that wants genocide, because they're going to kill a lot of people in the process. Moving beyond that, the second, a huge fear of eugenics is that it would create a caste system. As in, there would be people who would be, obviously there would be two tiers of people even as soon as you started. There would be people who are fit to breed and people who are not fit. But when I say caste system, I mean people of genetic haves and have-nots. So people who couldn't breed could even potentially be seen as not second-class citizens at a certain point. They're just there in society. They're looked down upon. They're viewed by the state as genetically inferior. So why wouldn't everyone else view them as genetically inferior? And it would just create a system where they're perpetually fucked in life. As well as, going on to my next one, the use of genetic engineering technologies to create designer babies. That's a fairly new fear, considering that genetic engineering has only been around since the 80s sometime, and it's gotten really advanced here of late. And we might even see some of this kind of stuff in the near future. But if you were to use that, if we were to go along with the ethics of creating your own babies how you want them, you could see a caste system where it's people who can afford to do genetic engineering with their family and people who can't. Because assuming genetic engineering is like any other technology, it would be ridiculously expensive at first and then get cheaper and cheaper over time. Well, let's say in this case, the people who can afford it at first are then all the people in power, and they don't want everyone to have access to this technology. Then that will create an even further caste system of people who can afford genetic engineering, who are the super haves. Then you have the regular haves who are good enough to, still exist, and then the have-nots who are being exterminated slowly. Because we're assuming through just random genetic mutation, even after hundreds of years, there would still have to be people in that class. Maybe not constantly, but quite often. One argue of the danger is the destruction of human genetic diversity. I don't see that happening, at least not quickly, at first. If you were to make it really stringent requirements for it, it could destroy genetic diversity with how many humans there are on the planet, unless you were to limit the gene pool down to very few. I mean, if every human on Earth were to die except for 50 in a small town somewhere in one city, then maybe we could talk about the loss of human genetic diversity. But even if a few thousand humans were to survive today, we'd still be enough genetic diversity to restart the human race. It started somewhere with just a few genes, and mutations are all that really happens. So you just need enough people to get a working pool started, and then mutation takes over from there. Uh, the last danger I have is an infringement on human rights. Because actually, believe it or not, the rights of disabled people to not have forced sterilization done to them and even to adopt children is guaranteed by some rights act, I assume from the UN. I actually didn't read into it, but I just happened to see it as I was doing a bit of research before I went on this rant. So you have the obvious pushback against infringing on human rights by forcing someone to be sterilized. Because I know me, especially, individual rights are a huge thing. My views get murky when it comes to improving society as a whole, because I'm one of those people, yes, I believe in individual liberty, but I would gladly sacrifice one family member to save 1,000 strangers. I have a weird dichotomy that's just strange over whether I want individual liberty or that, and that's if I'm forced to make the choice. I mean, if possible, I would stop both from happening, of course, but we're assuming a lot of things in that kind of scenario. Unless they told me it was something like one family member or 1,000 people who had committed violent crimes, I'd kill 1,000 real quick. Well, it depends on the family member, but anyways. Actually, no. Even if it was one of my most horrible family members, I would still kill 1,000 violent offenders, because the one shitty family member would still be better to be on the streets than the 1,000 violent offenders. But anyways, assuming it's the few for the many, and both sides are, and assuming, I guess the many in this case, assuming the many are decent, productive human beings, I'll choose the many over the few. Not law-wise or political-wise, but in a do-or-die scenario. So, my opinion on eugenics is a bit of cautious optimism. Not about eugenics, but more so about genetic engineering. This is a topic I want to get way more into later once I've done plenty more research on the topic, because I'm a person who believes strongly in scientific advancement and wants humanity to go as far as it can take itself. Why should we limit ourselves to what we know rather than looking at the unknown? I mean, if we could use genetic engineering to get rid of disease in everyone without having to do a forced breeding program, that'd be great. That would be eugenics that helps everyone. Genetic engineering is, I think, it's gonna be a new topic of if, ands, and buts here soon. And someone's gonna inevitably muck it up exactly like eugenics. Genetic engineering is a very, 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 very less forceful way, because I think genetic engineering should be an entirely voluntary thing, but you should be able to do it. I don't think, morally wise, I don't like the idea of designer babies, because I don't think you should just be able to pick and choose traits for a child before they're born. But anyways, that's an entirely different discussion. If we could use genetic engineering to do something like get rid of, I don't know, people's ability to get malaria or something, that'd be something I would easily support. But on the grounds of eugenics, getting back to the main topic, on the grounds of eugenics is yet another social philosophy that sounds good on paper, but that is very impractical to apply to human beings. Human beings concern themselves with very, very few things highly. Right? You go on the basis of needs: food, shelter, safety. Safety is one of their, like, most primal. Safety is one of our most primal instincts. If someone is trying to stop you from having children, that is endangering your safety, because part of your safety is passing along your genetics. We are programmed to want to do this. And that is why eugenics will never really succeed in the old-fashioned style, because even if you were to try and implement it, unless you force sterilized everyone that was not supposed to be, unless you force sterilized at birth everyone who isn't undesirable, which you'd have to figure out new ways to test that, because you can't really test a baby's, IQ or something. Obviously, if it's a very severe form of, like physical deformity or something, you can kind of see it. But say it's like mild autism and you're not allowing that in your eugenics program, you're probably not going to see that in an infant. You're going to have to wait till later. And, I mean, if it's a really mild case, you might not even spot it until someone grows up. You'd have to have all kinds of health checkups and exams mandated by the state to prove that people were still eligible. You could try what the Nazis did and say only for people who are, before people get married, they have to do that. But in this day and age, you definitely don't have to be married to have a kid. So, assuming that continues, you'd have to do random checkups on people all the time, which would be a very expensive prospect for the state. And kind of unrealistic. So, eugenics, to me, falls into that category of, it's another idea that makes sense why someone thought of it, makes sense why it's on paper, but is very impractical to put in real life, because even people like me, who can see what the benefits might be, inevitably are going to say, well, that's unrealistic to expect of people. You can't expect people to just sit down and say okay to them or their family members not being able to have children in a mandate by the state. Individual rights will always be a direct opposition to states, unless the state is fighting for individual rights, in which case, and this very rarely happens, unless they're fighting for individual rights, they're pretty much directly in opposition, because the state makes laws that restricts freedoms. It's pretty much what it does, entirely. Look at almost any law, and it's restricting some kind of freedom. Some freedoms deserve to be restricted. Like, humans have the freedom to murder whoever they want because we have free will. Doesn't mean we should. So, to that end, though, eugenics has had a bad rap on it. I wouldn't support an extreme version of eugenics. If it was a eugenics light, where it was just we were trying to get rid of severe mental and physical retardations, like people who are just going to be a burden to society, to the state, to the taxpayers, maybe. People will never support it en masse. At least not in today's society. You'd have to start brainwashing people in a way where everyone thinks that these are the evils of society, which isn't going to happen more than likely. So eugenics is probably dead, and if it ever comes back, it will only be under the new name of genetic engineering. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I wish you a good day, and thank you for listening to The Offensive Truth.